Hope you heard what the Lord was speaking to you today through many of the readings. There was this theme of blessedness, that the Lord desires blessing upon you. First reading, sang it in the Psalm, as well as in the Gospel today, where we hear the version of the Beatitudes in Luke's Gospel, which is a little bit different from the version of the Beatitudes that we're probably used to hearing in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew's is more speaking towards the Jewish people, and in Luke's Gospel it's more towards the non-Jewish Gentiles. Just as we can see in this passage, a large crowd of people from many different places comes to listen to Jesus. He's there teaching in Galilee, in the rural northern part of Israel. So there's people from that region, as well as people from the southern part of Israel, from Judea, as well as from their capital city of Jerusalem, and even parts that aren't Jewish, from Tyre and Sidon as well. So all these people from separate communities come together there on level ground where Jesus will teach them all the way to happiness, to eternal blessedness. And though each come from their own unique homes, Jesus knows that all of us have more things in common than we do apart. We all have the same destination, the complete happiness of heaven. We're all meant to strive and reach this blessedness together. So knowing this, I want to follow up on our latest that's come through with our pastoral planning. We had an update in last week's bulletin, so hopefully you had a chance to read through that. And while it does repeat a number of things that you've already heard before, there's a few things that are new that I just want to kind of flesh out a little bit after hopefully you read it last weekend. So the entire process of planning in our area, if we recall, started 2.5 years ago. The initial proposal that came out, there was a lot of pain and anxiety. It was proposed for some parishes to be chapels. Though in response to us, the Archbishop took that off the plate and allowed us in our areas to begin to formulate what a future would look like together. And it was clear that in order to account for the fewer number of priests, something we can't control, that parishes would need to group together. So it was decided about a year ago that Petersburg, Rayville, and Elgin, along with Neely and Tilden, were to be connected in a grouping. So those 5 parishes. But then during this last year, also the parishes in Ewing, Clearwater, and rural St. John's, who at first hadn't been part of our discussions because they're in a different deanery, they began considering their future as well and recognized that, in order for they also to have stability, that it would be wise to also join our grouping as well, especially as they recognize some of the connections they already have through some of them already connected to Pope John. So during the past several months, representatives from all 8 of these parishes have been coming together, meeting and engaging in conversation. The conclusion of these conversations is that these 8 parishes will work together to form a single grouping, which will eventually be served by just 2 priests. Currently, it's kind of 3.5 serving those parishes. So the newsletters that we've had a couple times in the bulletins have tried to summarize something of what was going on at those meetings. As well, the 3 priests that are currently here, myself, Father John Norman, and Father Pat Niels, have also been working and meeting together. This month, for example, we've already had one weekend where we switched around. So you had Father Pat here, and this coming weekend you'll have Father John here. So hopefully have us as priests to be able to see and get to know one another's parishes, as well as for all of you to have a chance to see each of the priests a little bit more if you haven't had a chance to do so. The first step in implementing our grouping will occur July 1st. So since Monsignor Stefan Smyer, who's in Cedar Rapids, is retiring this summer, Father Mark is going to be in Albion have not only Albion, but also take care of that community as well, which will then move Petersburg up into our grouping. So all of this has been communicated before, so hopefully that's not too new for people. But there's also several new things that were in the newsletter last weekend. So first, in January, there was a meeting for all the priests in the Archdiocese about this planning. Up to this point, it had kind of been just in a couple deaneries out here in our areas. But now all priests met together because it's recognized that the kind of grouping that we're forming here has to occur everywhere else in the diocese. Recognizing the number of priest retirements that are coming up. In the next 5 years, we're going to have between 18 to 24 priests retiring. And in the next 10 years, we will be down 1/4 of all the priests in the whole diocese. So quite significant numbers going down. So at that meeting, a map with circles that we've kind of seen for our areas were drawn throughout all the rural areas especially. And so in one sense, we're kind of blessed to have been going through this for several years. At least, we've had time to think about things. Some of the other parishes, this is going to be very quick for a number of them. Of course, this isn't all going to happen at once. There's various steps that we have to go through, often depending upon retirements. One requirement that has come forth from that meeting for the whole diocese is that the Archdiocese says that the groupings have to be in a one-pastor model, which means that each of the groupings will have one priest as the pastor, and if a grouping happens to have any other priests that are also in that grouping, those priests would be associate pastors. This is part of what's dictated by church law, but if you think about it, it's kind of a best practice for many businesses and organizations having a single person to take the lead. So this brings us to some of the new things in that newsletter that's specifically about our grouping. So the final goal, as I said, will be for all 8 parishes, each retaining the status of a parish with separate finances, as well as a mass on the weekend, will be served by 2 priests, 1 pastor, 1 associate. And they'll also be sharing and served by a 1 parish staff that will be located here in Elgin. So this will need to be implemented over the course of the next 5 years, but it will happen in stages. So as I already mentioned, Petersburg will be joining the grouping this July 1st. But at the same time, in July, Father John's 3 parishes in Ewing, Clearwater, and Rural St. John's will also be joining the grouping as a first step, just the 6 out of the 8. Neely and Tilden, of course, remain part of the conversation, but they won't be joining quite at this time yet. Because with Father Pat just having arrived within the past year, it wouldn't be wise or good for either their parishes or for him to undergo that kind of big change that quickly, having just had a change in pastors. But they certainly anticipate also coming in to our grouping under the 1 pastor model. So with these 6 initial parishes coming together, I know that for many of you, the question on the forefront of your mind is, what about Mass? What is that going to look like? And it's certainly a big part of our discussions that we've been having. And unfortunately, at this point, we don't have the exact times to give you right now, so you'll have to wait a little bit longer, but it'll be one of the next things that will be coming up. I can tell you that the changes for Mass times will affect our 3 parishes, but not Father John's parishes, since we're not reducing from 3 priests to 2 just at this point in the grouping. Obviously, the change that we're trying to make now, we do so with the knowledge that we will have to change again when we do go from the 6 to the 8 parishes being served by 2 priests instead of 3. As I mentioned, the grouping has to follow a 1 pastor model. And as good friends, Father John and I are excited to be working together, to supporting each other as a priest team. It's really good to be able to, not have to make all the decisions by yourself, but bounce it off of one another. But as the archdiocese required, it means that one of us has to be pastor and one of us has to be associate. So, taking a number of different things into account, since we're discussing it, looking at each of our abilities and the needs of our parishes, we decided that Father John will be pastor and I will be associate pastor. We decided this on a number of things. For example, Father John, he has a greater aptitude in the areas of finance and administration, not only naturally, but also as part of some of his assignments that he's had previously. And for myself, I know I have certain limitations in those areas. I do my best. And I'd be willing to take on the role of pastor of the grouping of all 8 parishes, but I know that if I did, it would limit me in other areas. So realistically, I would have to probably stop teaching at Pope John if I took that role. And I know that it's something I enjoy doing and something that many of you have expressed to me as something you value, having the priest's presence there in the school. So, know that it's not an easy decision for me to, stop being pastor. When a priest becomes pastor, he experiences a whole nother level of responsibility and being a spiritual father for you. I love being your pastor, but I also love you enough to not cling to a title or authority when the desire is to serve you and all of our parishes. It's not, of course, as though Father John wants to just come in and take over everything. Of course not. We want to work together as a priest team. And even if I don't have officially the title of pastor, I'll still be one of your priests. I'll still be a spiritual father for you. Archbishop Lucas intends for the two of us to remain here for several years as we develop this model. So please continue to pray for us priests and for the staff of our parishes, for our leadership in our parishes, because there's so many factors that have to be worked out to form this future together. We definitely need your support in many different ways. Some moments it can be kind of stressful, all these changes. A passage from St. Paul to the Philippians keeps coming back to me that expresses an attitude that I hope that we can all adopt. It's really the attitude of Jesus the servant. To humbly regard others as more important than yourselves, each looking not out for his own interests, but also everyone for those of others. That we would look out not just for ourselves, but for the needs of others, for the needs of each other's parishes. As we hear in the gospel of how many people from different places, from Galilee, from Judea, from Jerusalem, from Tyre, from Sidon, all came together to listen to Jesus there on level ground, that our parishes too may come together as on level ground around the Lord, to be led by him on the path to eternal happiness.